Hello, my friend, and welcome to the Phillip Mason Show, where acquiring wisdom is king, learning is home-centered and lifelong, resulting in great decisions in our education, career, and entrepreneurial path. I'm your host, Phillip Mason, and I am delighted to have this time with you today in episode number 14. Many of the most influential founding fathers of the United States of America, they believe that citizens should take time to serve in public offices, that they should run for office, be appointed to office, serve for a relatively short period of time, and then return back to private life, normal life. Return back to your day job, basically, or your normal vocation in life. And that's what they believed. And that's what they practice. In the United States today, we're actually seeing the exact opposite happen. We're actually seeing where a majority of our politicians today are what we'd refer to as career politicians. They've dedicated their whole life to serving in the government. Now, that's not what the founding fathers intended. And the reason for that is because they were concerned about too much power being clustered in the hands of the few, the hands of the elite who were in the government and had constant control of power over long periods of time, and would become sick with that power to the point where they would do whatever they wanted with that power, irregardless of what the people wanted. And that's not what the founding fathers wanted. They wanted to get away from tyranny, and they wanted a system that would preserve democracy, would preserve the republic, it would preserve the constitutional freedom that people have here in the United States of America. And so this idea of a citizen politician or a citizen candidate for office is really something that the founding fathers pushed. And they wanted all of us, those of us especially that have prepared ourselves and have educated ourselves, to run for public office should that opportunity present itself and be made available, but to be able to run and to serve for a time, serve their fellow citizens, particularly, especially on a local level, just as local government is the most effective as people can be in touch to what the local people need. That becomes really important. But really, for all levels of government, the founding fathers intended people to be able to go in there, serve, for a few terms, maybe just one term even, and just get in, serve for a time, and get out. But that's really not what's happening today. Now, let me just kind of preface things here a little bit. So, there are some career politicians today that have basically devoted their whole careers to serving in the government. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily. We do have some people that have devoted their whole career to serving in public offices, and they keep running over and over again for offices. And they're doing a good job, and they're trying hard to do the right thing. They believe in principles of freedom. They know what the principles of freedom are. They follow them. They know what good structures of government are, and they follow them. They work hard to preserve the U.S. Constitution or their state constitution, and they really hold it up. The challenge is when you get the majority of politicians who become career politicians and they start ignoring the Constitution of their state. They start ignoring the Constitution, the United States Constitution, and they start doing their own thing. And that's a problem. That's what the founding fathers wanted to avoid. And so there's really profound wisdom here from the founding fathers in saying, hey, we don't do career politicians in our country. It's not our thing. Now, I know some of you are going to say, Philip, there's founding fathers that were career politicians. What are you talking about? Well, that's true. There were some that were. But what's important to recognize about this is that those founding fathers were incredibly well educated. They were incredibly effective in their public service, to the point that the public demanded that they come back, meaning they went reluctantly and served. They were oftentimes demanded back. They were told to go serve. It happens so many times to so many of them. And it was hard on them. It was really hard on them because they didn't want to go serve in government anymore. There's a few that did, but most of them didn't. And ambition is one of those things. It's a double-edged sword, and you have to be really careful with it. And the founding fathers knew that. Some of the founding fathers were very ambitious men, but they recognized the danger in being ambitious in government, and it can lead to tyranny. And they wanted us to be wise and be aware of that. So I just want to spend a little bit of time today talking about some of the things that just a few of our most prominent founding fathers thought about on this topic. And I hope this is something you'll take very seriously and consider in your own life when voting for candidates. And if you're choosing to serve or to run for public office yourself, this is definitely something to think very seriously about because it strikes at the very heart of the kind of government that we have. So let's talk about George Washington for just a moment here. George Washington just had almost like demigod status in our country in the early days. And that's because of his tremendous service, just his tremendous character, tremendous leadership. And he was untouchable in a lot of ways. People just rallied around him. They believed in him, and he was able to accomplish great things for the American people, be a deliverer from the hand of the King of England and bring freedom to the peoples of America, and just did it in a tremendous fashion. Now, George Washington understood this idea of what we call servant leadership. So, and, he gets this from some of the ancients and some of the Enlightenment thinkers, but he was also a Christian. He gets this from Jesus Christ. So even though George Washington was a very great man, he was also very humble, and he took a servant-like approach to his public service. And he says, I'm here to serve, I'm here to help. And many times people came to him and they just begged him, like, we need your help. We need you in office. We need you to run the Constitutional Convention. We need you to run for president. And he didn't want to do it. He's like, I'm going to retire to private life. I'm going to go back to my farm. I'm going to go back to doing what I enjoy. I need time with my family. I haven't seen them in a long time. But a lot of times he just got called up, and the people said, we need you. We absolutely need you. And he had many people a lot of times persuading him to enter public service. And so he did it reluctantly. George Washington is kind of interesting because he's one of the few presidents, one of the few founding fathers that didn't have a college education. Most of them had a college education. What's special about George Washington is that he educated himself very well. And so he was actually homeschooled, if you can believe that. George Washington, the first president of the United States, he was actually a homeschooler, which is really remarkable when you think about it. So he was self-taught. He was taught by his family. He studied religion. He studied leadership. He studied military strategy. He studied surveying, and that kind of became his initial career. He did a lot of land surveying into the frontier. And then he also studied the military arts as well. And he, of course, started off in a military career, and he fought in the French and Indian War, which led to his prominence, which led to him being nominated by John Adams to serve as the commander or general of the Continental Army that fought against Great Britain. George Washington, when he was asked to serve as president of the United States, he really didn't want to do it. And he actually thought that he wasn't going to be a good president. And he was worried about if he could handle the administrative role. He was worried about if he'd be homesick and miss his farm. He was worried about all these different things. And it actually turned out that he was a really solid president. He was actually a really good president. And he did a lot of amazing things to set up our country. And he set up a lot of precedent of how things should run. He set up a cabinet. He did a lot of really great things to put our country into a good position of success. Now, it's interesting, he didn't have that college education. The primary reason for that is that his father died when he was 11 years old, and there really just weren't any funds available for going to college. And so he didn't take that path. And instead, he educated himself in other ways. And so really, our first president of the United States was a homeschooler. He was self-educated, self-taught, and learned as he went along. But his willingness to serve and to lift others and to be a servant leader really made a big difference. And people really wanted him to come and serve because they could just see the greatness in his character that had come from those things that he had learned, from the experiences that he had had. When they were making the U.S. Constitution, James Madison did a lot to kind of round everyone up and to get everyone to participate, saying, hey, we've absolutely got to have a new U.S. Constitution. The Articles of Confederation are not working. And James Madison realized really quickly that the only way he was going to get delegates from every state, because all the states were going off doing their own thing, was if they had one unifying leader. And he knew that indispensable man was George Washington. And so he told people, hey, George Washington's going to be there. And that's how he convinced people to show up. And once again, George Washington was reluctant to show up because he wanted to retire. He'd already spent 8 long years fighting the Revolutionary War and just absolutely exhausting war. And he really wanted to go back home to his wife and to his farm and just be able to have a normal life as a citizen. But yet he eventually hearkened to James Madison and his message, and he came and he served. Now, what's interesting about George Washington is when he served as president in the U.S. Constitution, there wasn't any term limits on the president. And so he served for 2 terms, and then at the end of that, he actually stepped down and said, I'm done, I'm finished. And everyone just kind of was just, totally shocked and surprised by that. Even Europe, leaders in Europe were totally shocked at that because they knew just how much power and influence that George Washington had. And George Washington said, you know what, I don't want to serve anymore. Like 2 terms is plenty. 8 years has been plenty long enough. I've given a lot of time to my country, and there's other people who are very capable of serving as president. And so instead of taking on like a king-like disposition and just keep serving forever or becoming a career politician, he stepped down. And because of his example, pretty much every other president after George Washington did that. And of course, that came to an end when FDR ended up getting elected for not just 2 terms, but 3 terms, and then a 4th term, and then eventually died in the 4th term. And then Congress later on came on board and said, we got to stop that, and we're gonna put term limits on the president. So George Washington, he believed that entrenched power corrupts, and that office holders should be very careful of that, and the people should be very careful of that. And he really truly believed that public service was a temporary duty. And Thomas Jefferson was also like Washington. People had to prevail upon him to come and serve. So Thomas Jefferson is another great example. Thomas Jefferson, he was a very dynamic individual, just many talents. And like Washington, a lot of times people said, we need you. You have to be here. And it's interesting, John Adams, who's one of the foremost of the founding fathers, he would sometimes get annoyed with Thomas Jefferson. And he got annoyed with him because sometimes Thomas Jefferson didn't show up. Sometimes he didn't stay. Sometimes he wouldn't speak up in meetings. Sometimes he wouldn't give his voice. So a lot of times John Adams was trying to convince Thomas Jefferson to come back saying, hey, you're smart, you're intelligent, we need you here, don't go away. But Thomas Jefferson, he recognized, he was happier at home with his family. He loved being at Monticello. And he was a man of many talents. And so he was a scientist, he was a writer, he was an inventor, he was a farmer. He did all these different things on top of his public service. And those things really occupied him to a huge degree. And so a lot of times he had to be kind of extracted or pulled away from his work to be able to go and serve in public office. Thomas Jefferson, he once warned, once a person casts a long eye on offices, a rottenness begins in his conduct. So it's pretty powerful statement from Jefferson. He says, once a person casts a longing eye on offices, a rottenness begins in his conduct. So Thomas Jefferson was speaking from experience here. I think he recognized his own fallibility. I think he recognized his own limits of his human nature, that it was possible for him to be contentious and to be grumpy or to want more and more power the longer he stayed in office. And I think he saw this in himself. But it's just such a powerful phrase that he has here. Once someone casts a longing eye on offices, a rottenness begins in his conduct. And honestly, that's what we're seeing in the United States today. We're seeing a lot of politicians who have been in office a long time, and there's a rottenness that begins in their conduct and in their character, and it does not serve the American people well. So Jefferson was really an advocate for rotation in office, so to prevent that type of corruption that's happening and what we're seeing very rampantly happening today. And he was very concerned about the political elite. Jefferson spent a lot of time in France. And so France had the political elite, right? So it had the aristocracy, and that's what it was based off. And of course, at that time, it still had a king. This is before the Revolution, which actually came not that much longer afterwards. But he saw how the elite kind of controlled everything, and it prevented really the good people from being free and having opportunities, so on and so forth. And he wanted to prevent that from happening in America. Let's talk a little bit about John Adams. So we've talked about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. I just want to talk a little bit about John Adams. He also felt the same way as Washington and Jefferson. And I'm just going to read a few quotes from him. So John Adams said, "There is danger from all men." So he says, human nature being what it is. He says, "The only maxim of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty." So, let's switch it up. Get a lot of people to serve in there. Let's not just have one person be in there forever, right? Or have a group of people who are all in there buddy together for long periods of time, and they end up doing whatever they want to do. There's another quote here. I love this one too. He says, "The jaws of power are always open to devour, and her arm is always stretched out, if possible, to destroy the freedom of thinking, speaking, and writing." So he understood, this political pressure. He understood some of the secret combinations and the backroom deals that can happen between politicians and other groups who are seeking favors and wanting power and wealth and authority, and that they will abuse the trust that the public has put in them for their personal gain. And they'll literally put the damper on thinking and speaking and writing and the press and everything else. And so Adams, he really knew that men were ambitious. He himself was a very ambitious man, and he knew that it needed to be checked, and that, people needed to move forward with humility, especially when seeking public office or being asked to serve in public office, just because he knew, once people get that taste of power, they really start thirsting for more. And it's human nature for, if you get some power, to start abusing your subjects and to exercise unrighteous dominion, or to be able to take advantage of others so that you can get more power, more gain, and equality starts going out the window. And once again, Adams, he was just like Jefferson, Washington. He knew he was the minister to France, and he was the minister to England, and also to the Dutch. And he knew all about the elite. All those countries had their elite, and he wanted us to avoid a political class of elites. That was really important to him. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to talk about Benjamin Franklin. Franklin will be our last one, so there'll be the four founding fathers I'll talk about today. So Franklin also, he was in the same camp with Adams and Jefferson and Washington. Once again, he had been overseas a lot. He was also the minister to France, and he spent a ton of time in France. And so of anyone out of the founding fathers, he knew extremely well how much corruptness was in the French elite, the French aristocracy that served under the king. And he just knew, I mean, it's so fascinating to read about Benjamin Franklin. There, even in his own entourage, there was a lot of corruption going on, and it really was born out of the fact that French society was corrupt at that time. And he may have been aware of some of it. A lot of it we found out about afterwards, but he did the best he could with a tough situation. But Franklin has always had a lot of wisdom. And here's one quote I'd like to share with you. "In free governments, the rulers are the servants, and the people their superiors and sovereigns. For the former, therefore, to return among the latter is not to degrade, but to promote them." Such a beautiful statement. Here's one more from Benjamin Franklin. "When the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic." Now, I don't know if you just felt an earthquake on that one, but I did. That's just, once again, another powerful statement. I'll read it one more time for you in case you didn't feel the earthquake. "When the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic." So here's the underlying problem. When you have career politicians, they stay in office by doing favors for people. And the best way to do that is to promise people money. So you start handing out money everywhere you go. And it comes in all different forms, all different shapes. Some of it's legal, some of it's not legal, depending on the politician and what they're up to. But as voters, as citizens, we should be very leery of any politician who promises us money. That's not their job. That's not their responsibility. And as Americans, we think that's normal today. We think it's normal for politicians to give away money to us. But the thing we have to remember is it's our money. It's our money. We're the ones paying taxes. We just want our unfair share of other people's tax payments. And that's not right. That's not good. And that's why we shouldn't have career politicians. because they take everyone's money and then they dole it out to whoever they want to. And that's what destroys freedom in America. And we can't have that. That's not the way to success. That's not the way to long-term prosperity. Government has very specific roles. Taxes are supposed to be used for those very specific roles, primarily security and defense. They provide security for their people and, defense against foreign invasions, and then, security against crimes, crimes among citizens, among people, and to defend the borders. Those are really the primary purposes of government. Those are some of the most fundamental purposes of government that the founding fathers laid out. And that's what those monies are supposed to be used for. And they're not supposed to be dished back out to the citizens. Now, of course, the Constitution gives a few other situations where money will be allocated. But today, we've got a system of money going 100,000, a million different directions. That's not what the founding fathers intended. And all of that today is because we have had this chronic problem of career politicians who stay in power by doling out more money to people. And they don't even have to be citizens. They don't even have to live in the United States of America. And it's wild and it's out of control. And our founding fathers, they knew that this was a problem that was going to happen in America. And so that's why they gave a lot of warnings about it when they were still alive. So Benjamin Franklin's the one that gave breath to this idea of the citizen statesman. So he's basically saying the common person, the common woman, or the common man, they must be educated in such a way that they know what the principles of freedom are, that they know what good government is, that they know what good government structures are and why we need to preserve those, and be able to just know the laws and understand them and be able to live by law and order. And so, as citizens, we really should have a higher level of education here in the United States because of the type of government we have. So if we were called upon for public service, we'd be able to serve competently because we've had a good education in the best books, in the principles of government, in the principles of freedom. The tragic thing is very few of us have that. In fact, our public education system is not set up for that. Not even close. Some schools, some charter schools, some private schools are getting back to that and doing it in a very well way. But we're so far away from it for the general population. It's just absolutely frightening. And we have very few people that are actually qualified and capable of running for public office because they don't have the type of education needed to be able to succeed in public office. They just end up doing whatever they want to do, and then that ends up being not what the Constitution says to do, which is what normally happens. And it's not good. And so we have to be really careful, and that's why I constantly talk about having a great books education and seeking to educate yourself in principles of freedom, because that'll make all the difference in your life, in your career, and as a citizen of the United States, and if you choose to run for public office as a citizen statesman or stateswoman. It's really, really critical to have that education. So Franklin also said something else. And this is just another way of saying the same thing that the other founding fathers said, but he says we want to avoid kind of this patronage politics, right? So where politicians are promising money to their constituents. And, as citizens, we like favors. We like politicians that will give us more money, give us more benefits, give us more loans, whatever it is, right? Will give us bailout money. There's a long list of different ways that can happen. And so that's kind of the way Benjamin Franklin framed it up, is this idea of patronage politics, where the citizens are patronizing their elected officials to give them more money. And as they give them more money, the votes come rolling in. And that's not the way it should be. Someone should be elected to office because they are competent and qualified, and they're moral, and they're willing to uphold the principles of freedom and uphold inherent natural human rights that are found in the U.S. Constitution. Ultimately upholding the U.S. Constitution. When someone runs for political office, that's really what they should be doing. So we live in a time where what the founding fathers most feared is actually our normal ongoing reality now in America. And career politicians are so common, we think it's normal. but it actually goes against everything that the founding fathers stood for. Now, it's true that not every founding father believed this way. Alexander Hamilton was an example of one who was more in favor of an elite group, but he's really more of the exception than the rule in that case. Now, as we think more in depth about this, if we're going to the voting booths and we're trying to figure out who to vote for, and we're hearing the different messages from the different candidates, and we have a politician who's bragging about their years of service in public office that they've been elected to and comparing their years of service to others, I would suggest to you that that might actually be a sign that you shouldn't vote for them and that they actually need to be voted out of office, and that it's good to rotate someone else in to take their spot. And not just anyone, but someone who's competent, someone who's going to follow the principles of freedom, someone who's going to uphold the state or U.S. Constitution and the human rights that go along with those. I think that's really the way we should approach that. Your politicians who seek their own aggrandizement are one of the key reasons why America is failing right now, failing to grow, failing to be a healthy country, failing to make good progress. And there's so many indicators of why that is. And we could spend more episodes talking about that, but I think you've experienced that in your own way, my friend, and you know what I'm talking about. So I won't go into that in depth, but these are some of the ways. I'm just going to give you a few brief examples of some of the ways America is failing right now. And it comes back to in large measure, what's going on with our career politicians. America has a debt it can't repay or refuses to repay. Our government can never balance a budget. And oftentimes it doesn't matter what level it is, but certainly the federal government. They just don't know how to balance a budget, and they just keep adding more to the budget all the time. We have our governments, our federal government particularly, is always doling out money to citizens in cash and also in benefits. It just happens all the time, and they've just lost control of it. Like, they don't even know where the money's going anymore. We have massive bailouts to corporations who have made foolish choices rather than just letting the market forces take their natural toll and allow new competitors to rise up. They just keep having these existing companies limp along and continue to make bad choices. When you dole out money to these corporations that have made bad choices, guess what? They continue to make more bad choices, and their products and their goods and services, the quality of it goes down. We've seen that over and over again. That's common knowledge. If there's an exception to that, it's very, very rare. The other things government do is sending a huge amount of monies to countries overseas in forms of, could be helping them with certain programs, helping them through war. We've seen literally 1,000 different reasons under the sun why we're sending money to other countries overseas. And some of them have very big moral implications to them that have really nothing to do with our U.S. Constitution or with our desires as citizens. And in some cases, we're even funding terrorist organizations. It's just absolutely insane to think that we're funding the organizations and the countries who are enemies to us and want to see us destroyed, that we're actually fighting against military equipment we funded. This is bizarre. So bizarre. Other reasons why our country's failing to grow is we have a fiat currency. We have cash money that's not backed up by anything, right? It has no real value to it. It's just paper that's printed. It used to have value behind it. We used to have a gold standard, but we just don't have that anymore. Our money doesn't have value, and so it inflates. So we have massive inflationary practices by our government. Anytime they need more money, they print more money, but there's nothing backing it up. There's no value there behind it. We're all just holding our breath and hoping that it maintains its value, and we're hoping that other countries of the world will continue to use our currency as the standard, and that will keep things propped up long enough to pretend like it's not a problem. Okay, and then last point here I'll just make here. Career politicians, they create more government and more bureaucracies to show they're doing stuff for constituents. So every little problem or every little issue that their constituents have, they'll create another program, another agency, another gift of money, whatever it is, to show that they're doing things and making things happen. When in reality, a lot of those things, or almost all of those things, should be handled by private industry or by the other sectors, the other six sectors of society. And so the government starts becoming all sectors of society. That's a big problem. If they start becoming the media, if they start becoming academia, start becoming the business world, if they start becoming the family, if they start becoming churches and religions, that's a big problem. And we don't want that to happen. So what's our solution to this problem? Well, there's a lot of things that we can do to solve this problem. But one of the key things we can do as a citizen is to study and prepare ourselves so we know we can discern very clearly between someone who understands the principles of freedom and someone who does not. And if we're asked to serve, or if we choose to serve, we know how to serve correctly from a moral standpoint and from a constitutional standpoint because we understand the principles of freedom, we understand how our government is supposed to be run, and we know how to help preserve a land of freedom for our fellow citizens. So the way to do that is by study and by learning. So I would actually recommend one of the best solutions to this problem is if everyone in America started learning about a lot of the same things that our founding fathers learned about. They don't have to read everything, but they need to learn enough to be able to understand the core fundamental principles that make society run. And when we do that, and when we apply it wisely, there's no end to what we can accomplish here in the United States of America. So, if you haven't read the U.S. Constitution, go out and read the U.S. Constitution. There's many PDF versions available online. It's very easy to pull up. If you haven't read the Declaration of Independence, go and pull that up. Read it. It's a beautiful document, very powerful. If you haven't read the Federalist Papers, go out and read what was written in the Federalist Papers. It was some of the most convincing pros and arguments for why we should have the federal government that we have today, and written by some really brilliant founding fathers, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. Just did a really excellent job with the Federalist Papers. Go out and read John Locke's Two Treatises of Government. It's a really great piece, just some profound insights there from John Locke on how government should be formed and how they should operate. Read the Bible. It doesn't matter whether you're religious or not. Read the Bible. If you want to understand where the Founding Fathers got a lot of the principles for human rights, where they got a lot of the principles for government structures, it comes right from the Bible. And in fact, the Founding Fathers quoted from the Bible very often, and in their letters, they wrote about the Bible very often. They were a very religious group. Read Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws. Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws is very profound insights into what it means to have good laws and to function and operate under a healthy system of laws, and how it brings freedom and power to us. I would also recommend reading Blackstone's, his commentaries on the laws of England. We were very heavily influenced by the movements towards freedom that were found in the Enlightenment periods as England was starting to improve their system and getting further away from the power of a king. And so Blackstone's commentaries are just absolutely fantastic. Read David Hume's essays, moral, political, and literary. There's some very good things in there. Calvin's Institutes of Christian Religion. There's some very important things in there to understand as 2/3 of the participants in the Constitutional Convention were actually Calvinists. They were Christians in the Calvinist sense. They believed in a Reformed Christian church. And so understanding what Calvin believed and what Calvin thought is very important. And then I also just put down here, you can read Plutarch's Lives. There's a lot of great, particular lives in his catalog of lives that would be really good to read to help you understand more about freedom and how to develop a republic. And the Founding Fathers got inspiration from Plutarch's Lives. Okay, so I know that's a lot, but that's what I would do. That's what I think you and I should do, is to study these documents, study these great books. And they will help us to be better citizens and vote for better leaders. And if everyone did that as a nation, we would see the wisdom in getting away from having career politicians and having citizen statesmen and stateswomen like Franklin talked about. If we have a group of citizens who are well educated in the principles of freedom, then America will be able to preserve freedom for its citizens for a long time to go. Our country can continue to do amazing things, just like it has for the last 250 years. And if we don't do those things, we'll continue to lose our freedoms. We've been steadily losing our freedoms here in the United States over the past 60, 70, 80 years. There's been a very steady decline in our freedoms. And that's come as career politicians have sought for fame, they've sought for glory, they've sought for fortune, they've sought for power, And we really need, as citizens, we really need to put a stop to that. That would be very important for us to do. My friend, it has been wonderful to have this time with you today. Thank you for spending it with me. I hope my thoughts have been a blessing to you in some way today and have served you and have motivated you to change the way you think about politics and the way you think about government, and that you have more of a desire to learn the principles of freedom and the structures of government versus political science and versus career politicians who really don't have the best interests of the American people at heart. Thank you again, my friend. It's been a pleasure being with you, and we'll catch you again soon on the next episode. God bless.